Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to jump in with our question and answer session for the new Resilient Ready Tampa Bay project led by the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, TBRPC for short. My name is Sarah Vitale, Senior Planner and Urban Designer with TBRPC. Since 1962, we are in fact celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. TBRPC has created a setting for regional communication, coordination, and collaboration. Our programs and services span a broad range of planning topics, including economics, emergency management, the environment, and resiliency. And we are proud to be able to offer this program this year within the resiliency domain of what we do. We have the next hour to cover a fair amount of information about this project. I'm going to start with a project overview and clarify the eligibility criteria. Then I'm going to pass it along to Andy Sternad from Wagner and Ball and Brian Cook from Applied Sciences. They are our subcontracted partners in this project, and they are going to clarify some of the details surrounding how these study areas for the project will be selected. Then we'll leave time for more of a discussion. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can answer any outstanding questions you might have. And during the session, please keep yourself muted until we reach the discussion. Until then, please use the comment feature to ask questions as you think of them. You can go ahead and write them down and send them in as a comment, and then we'll compile all of these questions and respond to each one of them during the discussion. And a reminder that this session is being recorded. I will make it available to all of you and easily shareable via YouTube, so you can pass this link to others who weren't able to make it today. So jumping right in with the project overview. So Resilient Ready Tampa Bay is funded by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Resilient Florida Grants Program. These grants fund projects that address the impacts of flooding and sea level rise across the state. TBRPC, in partnership with the City of Tampa, received funding to implement the Resilient Ready Tampa Bay project, where 3 study areas will be selected, and the local governments affiliated with those study areas will participate in this project. But first, what is this project going to do? So over the next several months, we will convene local government staff and multidisciplinary stakeholders, architects, urban designers, landscape architects, engineers, floodplain managers, and so on. We'll convene them in a charrette-style design process where we will develop adaptive designs for flood-vulnerable areas throughout the region. And our focus here is not only on the visioning and conceptual planning that needs to happen, but also we're thinking long-term about how do these projects get funded and ultimately built. So our intentions here are to better position local governments for the federal and state funding that is and will be available to help our region to address these modern flooding challenges. And because of that, we are modeling the study area eligibility criteria around different grant programs, in particular the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant. Now, if this sounds familiar, this idea for the Resilient Ready Tampa Bay project was inspired by the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact's Resilient Redesign program, which took place back in 2014, and it was so successful that it was repeated a few more times in 2015 and 2016. So I encourage you to check out the work that was done. Resilient Ready Tampa Bay will be a similar experience, but done in our own way and with a strong focus on project implementation. So to do this work, we are partnering with several local and a few out-of-state partners, as well as a national partner in the Netherlands. First, the City of Tampa is actively involved in this project. One of those participating study areas will be in or around Tampa. However, that doesn't mean that there are only 2 spots left. I can clarify who's eligible and what types of partnerships make sense for this project, and I'll do so in just a few slides. But the City of Tampa is involved. We're leveraging the experience of Wagner and Ball, an architecture and design firm based out of New Orleans, who have conducted many charrette-style planning exercises like this with a focus on flooding. We're also working with Applied Sciences, an engineering firm, and Environmental Science Associates, an environmental planning firm. Both groups are based in Tampa Bay and will assist in the site and engineering analyses. And then on the engagement side, we are working with the Urban Land Institute, who will assist us with getting the word out about the design charrettes and showcasing the lessons learned throughout this project in a symposium later this spring. And finally, we have a consultant from the Netherlands, Robert de Koning, who is a landscape architect and will be involved in and participating in the charrettes. Robert has a wealth of knowledge and expertise in living with the water design concepts, and we're excited for his involvement in this project. So it's a mix of local, national, and international expertise that we're convening for this effort. So this is our team as it stands, but through the selection process, we will of course be adding partners, and depending on the study area selection, those local governments will be active working partners in this project with us. The project will be conducted over the next several months. We're making our way through the selection process with the study area applications. These will be due in 2 weeks from today, and soon afterwards we'll be making the selection of all those participating. But so I was on the kickoff meeting in February, so that everyone who's involved in the 3 study areas will be invited for that kickoff meeting. And then the team will go back and do their due diligence and preliminary analysis of the study areas through February and March. We're going to hold the walking tours and design charrettes in April. And then in May, the team will prepare the recommendations report. And in June, we will host a showcase symposium to address to share the work that's been done with our members and stakeholders from throughout the region. And hopefully COVID does not inhibit the schedule, but if so, we're planning to be able to meet the same marks virtually or in a hybrid format. So what's in it for you? The 3 study areas will receive a lot of focused analysis, including design strategies, visualizations, cost-benefit information, maintenance guidance, and a great deal of technical analysis. We really only have the time and budget to do a deep dive in 3 study areas. However, this program more broadly is a regional effort, so the resources that we develop outlined here are intended to be replicable and scalable for other areas throughout the region. And whether or not your study area is selected, there is going to be a lot of benefit to gain by staying involved in this project. We're developing a technical committee for stakeholders to join, and that will be an avenue to provide input throughout this process. And at the end of the project, the Resilient Ready Showcase in June will be an opportunity to network around these ideas and learn from the work that was done together. So I know that was a lot of information. Please jot down any questions in the comments and we'll address them in the discussion. But I'm going to move ahead to cover some of the eligibility criteria. And this is all defined in the study area selection application, specifically on page 3. And Alana, please drop the link when you get a second, because I want to make sure that everyone has the study area application easily at hand, so I can cover it with you. But on page 3, the first 2 points of eligibility are that this program is for local governments. We are trying to build staff capacity for these types of analyses. So we are limiting eligibility to local governments, counties and municipalities. Everyone else will not be eligible to apply. And number 2, we're requiring that you are a member of the Resiliency Coalition, which most, if not all of you already are. There's no cost to join. We have 31 government members currently, and the coalition's a forum to collaborate and learn from each other and build resilience regionally. We have a leadership summit coming up this spring, along with the release of an update on the regional action plan. So if you're not tuned in to the activities of the coalition, I really encourage you to visit our website and get involved. So if you are a local government and a coalition member, you can apply. I mentioned previously that partnerships can be formed here. I think the main thing to be thinking about when you complete the application is the study area. You have a problem place or a flooding area in mind. And to give you an example of a potential partnership, let's say that your problem area is within the boundaries of the city of Gulfport. It could make sense for the city of Gulfport and for Pinellas County, for example, to partner and work together on this study area and through the Resilient Ready project. So that's kind of one example of a partnership, and we can get into more nuanced discussion about partnerships later or offline, but I just wanted to clarify that there is the opportunity for a joint response with the application. In fact, that type of collaboration, it could bring a lot of value to the project. And then the last 3 points, we're going to clarify that a bit further with Andy and Brian in just a few minutes, but to touch on them, we want to select study areas that have flood risks to buildings and infrastructure. So we want to understand what sort of impacts these designs could have in the community and economy. And on its face, we want to strengthen the resilience of physical assets like buildings and infrastructure. Number 4, we are selecting study areas that are public property. And again, Andy and Brian will hit on this some more in a few slides, but we want to do the most we can within a short time frame. So having that local control and working on public property will really help us to achieve those goals. And then number 5, we are selecting study areas that can incorporate nature-based solutions. So sites that are suitable for living shorelines, floodable bioretention systems, and so on. We want to think beyond the conventional gray infrastructure solutions to floodings that occurs in the 21st century, compounded flooding problems. We want to respond with a modern and innovative approach to site design. So now I'm going to hand it off to Andy and Brian to share some more about the study area selection priorities.
Great, thanks, Sarah. My name is Andy Sternad. I'm an architect and planner at Wagner and Ball in New Orleans. We've led these charrette-style water planning efforts in cities around the country, and we're really thrilled to be working with TBRPC on this effort, hopefully to meet and work with many of y'all. If you could go to the next slide, please. I'll introduce Brian Cook at Applied Science in Tampa, and just want to give you all a sense of the kinds of what we mean by study areas, or what we have in mind, thinking about specific properties and sites, but also more broadly about landscape and urban conditions around the region. Take it away, Brian.
Yeah, so I'm Brian with Applied Sciences. So in determining the sites, we'd like to, as Sarah was saying, create replicable situations. And so in considering that, we can maybe think of 3 landscape types in our region. Those being 1, barrier island coastal situations. 2, a waterfront area, maybe more estuarine, intercoastal, or within the bay. And then inland areas, which are more dealing with inland flooding issues, whether they're in a basin or associated with a lake or tributary kind of situation. So we'll be selecting, trying to select from one of each of those 3 areas.
All right, thanks, Brian. Just a couple of the thoughts about selection priorities. We're looking for projects and study areas that are feasible in the sense that there's action that can be taken there. There are some precedents we might rely on, but they're also visionary. So we don't want y'all to feel limited by what seems possible or impossible. If there's a particular challenge without an answer at this moment. I think that's inherent to the design process, is iterating and solving problems that are not currently solved. But the scale is really important in selection. We've had great success working with other cities, contextualizing single projects in a larger system. And that's also something that strengthens the funding application in our experience, showing impacts beyond a single site, but ways to begin with a single site. So we're looking for maybe an idea of a neighborhood-sized area as a study area with a basis within it of public property, some particular sites to begin. But the study itself and the charrette exercise may broaden into more of a neighborhood scale idea or concept. And finally, replicability. As Sarah mentioned, we're only selecting 3 study areas for this effort, but we hope to be able to map and gather the many other ideas that we expect to be submitted and find what may be replicable or relevant as prototypes across the region. Next slide, please. So just 2 examples here of what some study areas, what that might look like based on our experience elsewhere. For Norfolk, Virginia, we worked with the city staff and the Commonwealth to win a HUD NDR award in 2016, $112 million for the Ohio Creek Urban Watershed. So this is a 230-acre area with a suite of networked projects within it. So there's a retention constructed wetland, there's a perimeter berm system with a living shoreline, and a park retrofit for stormwater storage and some street scale green infrastructure, and some combined sewer retrofits. So that's all together probably more than what we'll design and cost for this effort. We may choose one particular element of those that I named within this area, but we'd like to have that contextual and coordinated approach for how a single site might work within the larger area or neighborhood. Next slide, please. One more example from New Orleans, a little closer to home for me. The Mirabeau Water Garden is a 25-acre site. So this is a kind of city-owned project site. It's actually leased to the city. It was a private site leased to the city for 99 years. But it's a stormwater retention and environmental education campus for the Gentilly neighborhood. It's a combined, multiple funding sources combined, and it situates within the larger Gentilly Resilience District. So this is a huge portion of the city, probably larger than we would consider for a study area in this project, but I just wanted to point out the nature of network projects surrounding. So I think there may be multiple opportunities that we might find with you as we dive a little deeper into what the specific project and study area entails. So I'll hand it back to Sarah. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Andy and Brian. So we're coming to an end to the presentation, and we'll move into a discussion, but I wanted to end with a simple question. Is your team ready? Are you all ready to become Resilient Ready? These points are outlined on page 4 of the application, the types of project commitments that you should be thinking about before applying. So real quickly, our selection will factor in how willing and able the selected local government is to jump into this work and kind of climb aboard. We're already moving pretty quickly, and we're really excited for this project, and we're ready to get to work. The work for the local government partners will include compiling a team of staff members with diverse backgrounds, attending key meetings, participating in that stakeholder committee, and then of course assisting in the coordination of a walking tour of the study area, and if possible, assisting to secure a location for the design charrette. We think it would be really valuable and exciting to meet people where they are and conduct the charrette in the study area community. However, the backup option here, if a location isn't feasible, is TVRPC will host the design charrette in our office space in Pinellas Park. And then at the end of the project, like I mentioned, we're going to have this big project showcase symposium. So we would expect the selected partners to be actively involved in the symposium, give a presentation about sharing your experience and lessons learned throughout this process. So wrapping up before Q&A, a reminder that the study area application is due in 2 weeks, Friday, January 21st by 4 p.m. You can fill out that form and email it to me, sarah@tvrpc.org. Please save the risk index report, which should really only take 1 minute, and it provides us with some more information about the study area. That should be sent along with your application, and the instructions on how to fill that out is in the application at the very end of the form. And lastly, please subscribe to our email list for more updates on this project throughout the spring. And with that, thank you for your attention, and we'll get into some of your questions. I'll stop sharing. And I see a hand raised, and I see a list of questions. Let me pull these up. Why don't we let Fatima, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question if you'd like.
Hey, Sarah, thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the last question in application is the recent investment in this infrastructure capital improvement. So my question is that it would be specific to the project location or just a general flood mitigation investment? in the city?
That's a great question. So the purpose behind that question is just to get a better sense of if there's already been some planning initiatives taking place, like what types of work may have already been done to address the flooding issue, to just give us a sense of where the community stands with this problem. So I think to answer your question, I think it'd be valuable to have project-specific information if that's available, or study area-specific information, but then also get a general sense of what the community's been doing. So some of that vulnerability analysis, even if it's a city or county-wide analysis, I think it's useful to include that so that we're aware.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, you have several questions in the chat.
Okay. Let's see. Alan asked if we'd be sending a link to the recording and slides. Yes, I will. Okay, Alana answered that. Thank you, Alana. For the examples, and I think this is a good question for Andy or Brian, but from Alan Biddlecombe, for your examples, approximately how long did it take between original concept development to completion of construction?
In the Norfolk example, that project began with a workshop similar to this in 2015, with the federal funding application award in 2016 through NDR. And that project has now progressed faster than any I've seen really in the country through a city manager style of government to construction completion this spring. And we've been involved kind of through the way. The New Orleans example began a little longer ago, after Katrina in 2005, and has been much slower to develop. But that funding was awarded also in 2016 for the specific project and the district-wide suite of projects. And the Mirbeau Water Garden is out to bid right now. So I think full spectrum, maybe a fast project would be 5 to 6 years, and it goes from there.
Great, thanks, Andy. The next question is from Ashley Painter, asking, do the buildings/infrastructure that are being affected/protected need to be owned by the municipality to be considered included within the study area? Andy, would you like to take that one?
Sure. I think the answer is yes and no. We'd like the project to have a basis in public space. But if there are other partners in the private sector who are part of the study area, who are willing participants, or who may be invited to weigh in and participate, I think that's a strength. So I expect most of the projects to engage public and private sector participants, but we'd like them to have a basis in public ownership.
Maybe I can add that there may be non-publicly owned buildings that are affected by flood that may have that flooding issue alleviated by projects that would occur in a public space. I think the issue is that we don't want to be relying on private property participation or action to create the successful implementation of a project.
Great, thanks guys. Another question we have, and I see Jeff just joined and he's got his camera on. This can be a discussion, so if you feel like you want to turn your camera on, feel free to do that. So Michael Perry asked a question, what is the definition of inland area? For example, if a river or lake is tidally influenced, is that neighborhood considered waterfront? In the same sense, if a community has waterfront properties in it, but the majority of risk flooding is inland, is that area waterfront? That's a great question. Brian, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, so first off, I think the areas are sort of guidelines. Maybe one of the ways of thinking about is the project types that would come out of it. When you're on a barrier island, there's some specific factors, especially with wave energy, sand movement, these kinds of things that we'll be dealing with in a situation like that, coastal environment. Then let's say the estuarine kind of waterfront area is maybe still dealing with tides and is dealing with that kind of brackish water situation. And so we're thinking about that as a project type. You're not dealing with the same effects as on a barrier island necessarily in that frontal zone, but still dealing with tides and things like that. And then as far as inland, that one's maybe a little more open or loose, thinking about, especially in our region, we have basins that can flood and have that unique issue of flooding. And so thinking about how to deal with that. But then there's also inland waterways, whether they've been, say, paved over or not, or have repeated flooding issues or not. When we're saying inland, we're thinking of that non-tidally influenced kind of situation dealing with more alluvial rainwater as the main problem. Although the other areas are also dealing with alluvial areas, but have their own specific set of things to deal with. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great. Thanks.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Kate asked if it would be possible to get a recording of this meeting. Yes, definitely. I will send that to you and everyone on this call. Let's see. Hank asked, do you have a preference for the use of a certain data set to identify flooding issues / problems? Or go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
One thing that will help is if, say, from Swift Mud criteria, Watershed Master Plan has already been completed, so that there's a model in place. That would be really beneficial. It doesn't preclude a site from being selected, but that would be very nice because we'd have that set of information to also get into the hard infrastructure and think about flooding. I'll let Andy talk about other aspects.
Yeah, and regarding modeling, we don't expect to do any new modeling or perform any new model runs for this project, but we have had success, especially setting up for benefit cost criteria, using any existing HECRAS or SWIM or other kinds of stormwater H&H modeling to extract some land use criteria or use that data and invert elevations and things like that to support BCAs. So the more data, the better. I don't think there's a preference in terms of data set or type, but any type of modeling that's available would be very beneficial to note.
And I think we're also going to be consider a future target date potentially for, say, sea level rise and that's correct. And so, Hank, some of that information will be available, should be available from TBRPC. I'm expecting. So that future forecast information will help out.
Great, thanks. Jeff's got his hand up. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate your presentation. I might have missed this, but I'm curious if you have a prediction of the amount of time it would take for the stakeholder, the city or county that's applying per week to work on this.
That's a good question. I'll pass that to Andy. I think we've kind of been back and forth thinking about this and defining the project schedule. But Andy, what are your thoughts?
Just based on past experience, I think there are moments of pretty intensive work activity around the charrettes, especially, and some prep for that. But I think it can really vary. There's probably a more intensive period up front of data coordination, kind of project definition, and then probably nearly full time for a couple of days during the actual charrette events and leading up. But it's hard to say, really. I think to the extent you're willing to engage with us, we're willing to meet you.
Great, thanks. I'll look through the chat again, and then I see Michael, you got your hand up. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Sage asks a question: would a good candidate project include roadway improvements or only vertical / building improvements? And I think when we define the study area, we'll include, roadways within that study area if we're looking at a neighborhood scale and it makes sense to do so. So I think that the answer is yes, and that maybe there could be some sort of pavement sort of design intervention or bioswales and things like that relate to the roadway. And it's not only the vertical and building improvements. Just to clarify, we're looking at landscape design, so it's everything, including the buildings in the study area. And if Andy wants to clarify, feel free.
I think you said it well. The more components and jurisdictions, levels of government that can be consolidated into a story of a project, I think it's all for the better.
Great. And then back to Michael and then Troy. So Michael, go ahead and ask your question.
Sure, thanks. This is kind of related to Fatma's question. I was wondering if you guys could explain if you do have an area that has had prior studies, is that something that's considered more attractive or less attractive for this application? I'm thinking in my head of areas where we might have had planning studies done, but they were deemed unfeasible. Would that be something that's more attractive because it's a challenge, so as an example, or is that something that's less attractive because there's already been an eye on that neighborhood, for instance?
That's a great question. I'll open it up to our team to kind of tackle that. Andy, any thoughts on that one?
Brian, if you'd like to weigh in.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking through it. And I think that if you think there's an openness to tackling the project through solutions that involve nature-based solutions and kind of layered use of space, these kinds of elements, then I think that openness is what we're looking for. It's definitely a positive if a project area has been identified by past studies, so that there's knowledge that that area is affected by flooding issues. So that's good to know. If I think I would think that, but you said that the project wasn't possible. So maybe thinking about what reasons a project wasn't possible, if there's a complexity factor to it that maybe won't be able to be accomplished within this really abbreviated and intense workshop format, then those kinds of sites are going to be difficult to handle within this kind of a process.
Great. Thanks, Brian. I see CJ's hands up. Do you want to ask a question or comment?
Yeah, I think there's a key factor that might be good if the team can elaborate on is a part of the BRIC application is looking at the low and moderate income communities. So you haven't gone through much of that in terms of criteria here, but how does that play in on what somebody who might be applying for should be thinking about or including in their application?
Great. So yeah, I mentioned that we're thinking about BRIC applications because ultimately we want to position people to be able to fund these things, and BRIC is a great generator of funding. One element that kind of covers the social vulnerability way that we're looking at this is through the risk index. So that's a component of the application, and essentially it looks at different census tracts and kind of does a community vulnerability index score. So we're looking at social vulnerability and areas that may have been haven't received investments comparably along census tracts. So that's one way that we're looking at things. And then another way that we've thought about selection criteria is just thinking about whether or not an area has received these types of investments, whether or not they've already done a vulnerability analysis. All of these low and moderate income types of criteria are things that we are definitely thinking about. And I'll let Andy and Brian kind of elaborate on what they're thinking too.
It definitely helps in some of the funding applications like HUD grants, for example. So that being known as a criteria and thinking about these locations, especially about applying projects to the area that maybe hasn't received, say, capital improvements or hasn't been as updated as other parts of the city, this is a great opportunity to consider those sites.
There's also a challenge you all are, I'm sure, are familiar with, making benefit cost analyses work out for LMI communities. One thing we've had success in, and an opportunity, I think, in this project, in the study area definition, is looking a little more broadly at communities together that share similar risks, but maybe have different demographic and economic profiles, looking for solutions that bridge or unify in order to wrap those together, possibly in a funding application, if not in an actual built solution that addresses communities more broadly.
Great, thanks. I see Hank's hand is up, and then I know Troy has a question, and there's a few more in the comments, but Hank first.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to ask a question what I hope most staff are thinking, and that is, are existing local governmental projects eligible or ideal for this? And the scenario is that, we know that the time frame on this application is short, right? Luckily, we're not asking for a lot of money. So there's no money, right? So we don't have to go to a board or get approval or anything like that. So there's some flexibility there, which is attractive. But given that, it's hard to just come up with a completely new project. I mean, maybe you can open up a grant application that you previously submitted and was denied, and see if it passes muster. But what we may be thinking in others is, can an existing, for instance, CIP project fit within the parameters of your opportunity? And I say that because maybe there's a project on the books, it's been approved, it's going to alleviate flooding issues, but it hasn't gone through design yet. And we know that maybe the approach is more of the traditional pathway to fix the solutions. And maybe if we go through this process, we can incorporate nature-based solutions. There can be a larger vision. It can affect a larger area. So I'm wondering if that's eligible or attractive or wanted from your all's end.
Yeah, immediate reaction is yes. I think that would make a lot of sense to include a project like that that's already been thought through and analyzed for defining the need and the problem. It just needs to go through that kind of design and iterative process to figure out which types of nature-based solutions can be applied. And I think that's really what the purpose of this is to help and provide a space for that. But Andy and Brian, if you guys want to weigh in on that, I do think that would be a project that's worth submitting.
Yeah, I think so. I think that ultimately we're looking for projects to be successful towards their end implementation. So if they're already along the lines and there's eyes on a certain location for a project to occur, that's good. People are committed to that. So I would say that's good. And then just go back on the other statement that openness to maybe accomplishing it through a more kind of nature-based kind of solution, which may make you have to reevaluate or look at the site and the way the capital improvement is going to be accomplished, because it might need a little more space, or you kind of have, I don't know, I would think you sort of have to play it out a little bit before submitting. But the ultimate goal would be to have sites that are queued up for implementation. And that may even mean getting kind of this is a quick deadline for submittal. And so, but it may mean getting that kind of nod of head, at least commitment from superiors that, like, if we're going forward with this, then we're going to be submitting this for a grant going forward, and wanting to do this and commit to it. So
I would echo all of that and say yes. In the Norfolk example I showed, there was a pre-existing road raising project within that district. And through the district approach and study, actually we realized shifting a small pump station around, adding a constructed wetland, there was a lot more benefit and possibility with the tidal flood protection, high tide flood protection component that could be added to that project. So yes, definitely. And I would just also add on the other side of the spectrum, if there's an area with a recognized problem or a well-known or documented problem with no design solution, no project on the books, just a problem. I think that's possibly an opportunity too, if there's a way to demonstrate public ownership in the vicinity.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think it would be fascinating to take existing projects on the books and reevaluate the approach, and then find better ways to incorporate nature-based solutions. And because that's what we're all trying to do here is change our approach. So yeah, I appreciate the response.
Thanks. So back to Troy. Great question. Since the City of Tampa is a sponsor or participating partner, will one of their projects automatically be one of the 3 projects selected? Yes, they will be involved in one of the study areas. At this stage, we don't know, which exact site or study area they're thinking about, but they're in the process of, considering which flooding problem they want to bring through this process. But the City of Tampa, will be one of those study areas. Whether there's an ability to partner, the City of Tampa could potentially partner with other local governments. That's still out there, but yes, to answer your question, they will be one of the 3 project study areas.
I just want to clarify on that. Was a requirement from FDEP. The City of Tampa was very gracious in not asking for that, but as a submitter on behalf of the region, on behalf of you all, some rules in FDEP world made that a requirement. So just to provide that as background.
Thanks, CJ. And then Roberto, are you looking at this grant being reoccurring in subsequent years? I think we'll have to just see how this goes, but I think when we wrote the grant, the intention was to create something that could be really valuable, and we'll do it with 3 study areas and see how that plays. And we're collecting, all these applications are defining different problem areas throughout the region. So potentially, if this were to happen again, we could have a great place to start and have a list of other study areas to consider for future iterations of Resilient Ready. But at this point, we're just talking about this spring. And next question, do you have a specific ranking/points system established to assist with the evaluation process? Not entirely. We are kind of working through a process of trying to define the best way to select these sites, kind of hitting on a lot of the points that Andy made about whether the site makes sense for a storytelling element for grant applications. I think ideally we want to pick study areas that can be replicable to other local governments throughout the region. So there is a little bit of subjectivity in considering all the applications once they come in. But if anyone else on our team wants to clarify, we don't have a specific points or weightings or things like that. It's kind of trying to find the best project that can make the most amount of impact in the shortest time frame that we have. And then the other question, Michael Perry, is the study area required or heavily encouraged to contain repetitive loss properties? I think that FEMA designation and metric is useful, especially thinking about funding and long-term project construction. But I wouldn't say that it's something that needs to be defined. If you have a recent flooding issue and it hasn't been designated as a repetitive flood loss area yet, I mean, that's still definitely something that would be eligible. But it does help to know that that FEMA has eyes on this project and that it's been a problem area for a long time in the community.
I just want to add to that because repetitive loss properties sort of insinuates that there's going to be some relief of that issue, and that can get complex and require lots of community engagement and kind of tender discourse. as far as if it's getting to that point of property buyout. So that becomes a complexity that I don't think we can take on with this project, just not in the time frame. But if it's an area that is known to, that is an indicator, repetitive loss properties can be an indicator of an area that has continual flood problems. And if it's perceived that those flood problems can, hopefully we can work through a process and alleviate some of those flood problems through the process of the design development, then that can be an opportunity as part of the project. So
I would agree with everything Brian said and add, this project is also forward-looking. So we're going to be looking at vulnerability in the future over time, 2040, 2080 even, looking for maybe some avoided loss action, some mitigation action that could be taken or funded at this point. So if you're aware of projects, problems on the horizon, or the way a problem may grow based on present indicators like repetitive loss, that would be useful to know.
Thanks, Andy. I see Hank's hand is up.
It's up again. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one, I want to say thanks to you all for applying for this funding and thinking of this project on behalf of the region. It's a good one, and it's a great opportunity for us. My question, I don't know who wants to do this first. Maybe CJ, put you on the spot a little bit. We have this project in its box and the criteria and the funding and the process, but what was the aspiration or vision behind applying for it? And what are you all hoping to achieve as an outcome for the region due to this project in these three study areas, these three charrettes in the study areas? Like, what's the end game and the hopeful next steps and outcomes after this is completed? And I'm asking that, one, I'm interested in knowing, and two, maybe it will help others kind of wrap their head around the larger picture here and how they can apply whatever your answer is to their proposal.
Wow, Hank, way to put me on the spot. That's a multi-layered question. We'll start with the evolution of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's design services and the combination of the region's local governments expressed and articulated interest in nature-based solutions going back several DEP grants ago and that sort of thing, and hearing from the local governments over the process of the regional action plan workshops about the significance of how do we begin to really imagine how to redesign and redevelop in more innovative ways using different kinds of things, and how difficult it is, at least from what we've heard that you've said, that it's challenging to find ways to cost these out, the examples that we need that are specific to our region and our typologies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was a combination of that and some really interesting, exciting work that Sarah had embarked on with the Newport Richey area, which was an early visioning redesign of some public owned spaces. Sarah, if you want to elaborate on that. And then our commitment overall is to really helping the coalition members and to catalyze across and learn from each other and really be successful at gaining, rapidly gaining, the kind of implementation funding that you all want to have. So that's the sort of big picture, but Sarah, feel free to explain more about Newport Richey.
Sure. So yes, everything CJ said, and then to kind of elaborate more on the evolution of the design services, that's kind of where I've played a role. And I worked with the city of Newport Richey, where they had, this flooding problem in their downtown, and it's really just a big pavement, parking area, and trying to think outside the box about nature-based adaptation. And we did a very mini version of a Resilient Ready process where, just working with staff, thinking through 3D modeling and urban design principles, kind of developing a conceptual plan and conceptual ideas for what can be done on this site beyond just extending the parking or, doing more built environment things. And what we came up with is a floodable park design. And after that all happened and TPRPC, started moving on to other projects, Newport Richey was able to take a lot of the conceptual planning and visioning work that was done and use it to apply for funding. And that kind of process really inspired us to try to formalize a program that can assist other member governments in doing so. And instead of just me being the one urban designer, we wanted to, we got the funding from FDEP. We can bring in a team of designers and landscape architects and engineers beyond the expertise of TBRPC to kind of bring and walk people through that process. So that's really kind of the intention with the Resilient Ready program, and that we're not just doing the visioning. We've got the engineering expertise. We want to help people get these things funded and built. And we think that the regional entity is a good avenue to be able to bring people together. And then some of the more specific outcomes, we're going to have the 3 case studies with the really deep dive design engineering analysis of those study areas. But then we're going to kind of be able to provide more guidance and support for other sorts of design focused interventions, kind of building that repertoire or understanding regionally and be able to share those with our member governments through the Resilient Ready program. So it's kind of that first step, and hopefully this can kind of scale and that we have more resources beyond these 3 case studies. But
that's a good summary, Sarah. And one last thing is our collaboration with the Urban Land Institute Tampa Bay group goes back to a project that precedes everyone here for a reality check 2.0 and a lot of growth management visioning. And we thought that this was the right time to really re-engage the Urban Land Institute in a formal capacity, which has been doing some really great project work with different cities, from going back to the St. Petersburg density in the coastal high hazard area and other things, and to with our 2 organizations and our networks also be able to engage their membership in this End Resilience Symposium, which will be, knock on wood that, COVID allows, that will be down at the Armature Works on June 14th, which you will all be a part of in terms of presentations and discussions and knowledge sharing, and bringing in a group from probably the Netherlands is in addition to the team that's here today. So we think that this is a great new way to kick off how to better engage different levels of development and bringing in the private sector collaborators as well through the ULI.
I just want to add on to that because I think it's a great question. A lot of us around here have been through a lot of meetings and have read the science and, done vulnerability assessments, and we all know what the problem is, but I think we're a little bit short on what's the solution look like. And so you're going to get renderings, basically. We're going to see what things look, what these strategies look like, and not just anywhere, right? Not just like anywhere in the country, but in our region. So I think that's really important. And then also, what does it cost? So there is a bit of this project and being real with it to understand cost implications. So, we'll be working on all of that. And I think then that is something that can catalyze us to like a next round and inspire people to maybe understand what some of these options mean, as opposed to things that they're already familiar with.
Thanks, Brian. So we have about 5 minutes left. Time for any final questions. And of course, if you think of any more questions, we are available over email to kind of continue this conversation.
Well, we just want to see as many applications as possible. We know you guys are short for time. This is pressed, but put your ideas in. We encourage it. Think as broadly or as specifically as you want to, because what comes out of this initial application form, of course, there'll be the 3 projects, but this will certainly help us as a region give back to you and figure out what next steps and different kinds of initiatives might look like based on the kinds of projects that you guys feel are really important for yourselves. So thanks for your time today, and good luck with your applications.
CJ. Oh, we got one more question snuck in. Who are the grant sponsors? Well, the funding is provided by Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Florida Resilient Coastlines Program, Regional Resilience Entity.
Thanks, Alan.
Nice work, Sarah, team, Andy, Brian, Alana. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.